Hi again, and welcome to another episode of the Government Transformation Show, the podcast of public sector change makers. I'm Tim Coulthard, Community Director here at Government Transformation Magazine. Today, I'm joined by Meeta Akhelikar, who's Public Sector Growth Lead at Microland, and our own GM for Government, David Wilde. We're going to be drilling into IoT and data and how they're transforming services in local government, local communities, placemaking, all things that have a huge impact on our quality of lives, outcomes for citizens. But how is data playing into that? How are sensors, IoT, smart places, 15-minute cities playing out in reality? What organizational changes need to happen to make a success of them? What technical and cultural changes need to happen? David and Meeta are going to drill into some of those big ticket items in this conversation. So let's jump in right now. So Meeta and David, welcome to the Government Transformation Show. Great to have you joining us for a conversation today where we're going to really drill into some of the exciting opportunities around IoT and data and how they can be transformative, how they can be changing the way we perceive services, all of that good stuff. So we're going to jump into some of that very shortly. Before we do, for those that do or don't know our guests here today, it'd be great just to get a quick intro from you both around your kind of expertise, how you're working with the public sector. So Meeta, please go first. Perhaps you could introduce yourself and how you're working with Microland in your role and supporting the public sector right now.
Great. So I'm really pleased to be here, Tim and David. Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss some of these points and really looking forward to our discussion on data. And I think I've mentioned this to you, David, before. It's a subject very, very close to my heart. In fact, I've worked in the IT services and digital services industry for close to 20 years, largely servicing private organization, but in the last couple of years, also looking at public sector, but a large part of that has always been around data management. Very, very passionate about good usage of data, not just a lot of data. So I think at Microland, I head up the public sector business in the UK, the specific focus being on local governments and helping them on their digital journey. And data obviously is one of the important aspects of that. So happy to be here again. Yeah.
Fantastic. And David, public sector lifer, you might say, but for those very few people in the public sector that haven't come across you at some point, maybe you could just do a quick intro about your role with us here at Government Transformation and some of your background in the public sector.
Yeah, no problem, Tim. Great. And great to see you again, Meeta. Absolutely. Big shift, isn't it, from private sector to public sector?
Oh, it is. It is.
Commercial advantage to transparency. We'll talk more about that later, won't we?
Sure.
Anyway, yeah, so great to see you all there. So David Wilde, one of the co-founders of GovX and the Government Transformation Show, and 35 years experience in central and local government and wider public sector, nationally and internationally. And for the last 5 years, been heavily involved in working with a lot of public sector organisations on the transformation journey. And in the context of this particular conversation, I've been a long-standing advocate and passionate supporter of the use of technology in reshaping the places we live, work, play, learn in, and of course, how we connect those places together going forward. So it's going to be a great conversation going through, I think, over the next sort of 40 minutes or so about, okay, not whether or not we need to, but how we're going to do it and how can we do it well.
Yeah. So as we said, we're going to get into some of the specifics around those opportunities, around maybe some of those transformative outcomes that are now real and within reach. But just to sort of set the scene a bit, I'm interested in kind of getting an overview from you both around the big opportunities and the context around that, whether that's technical, ethical, cultural, whatever it might be. So both for the local government, also central government and other public services as well, there's clearly this opportunity to harness data, identify and deliver transformative outcomes for end users, citizens, customers, whatever your choice of term is. So, but what are those key considerations we need to think about before we drill into some of that, those outcomes? Meeta, when you look at data, what's that framework you think it needs to operate within, and then as an outcome, what are the big opportunities, the big ticket ones, before we get into those specifics?
Sure. So, no, completely agree. I think there's a huge opportunity, not just for local government, but government as a whole, to really provide good public services to the communities. There are 2 or 3 foundational aspects that I always look at when I look at data. Now, one of the most important thing is what problem is the data going to solve? It has to be customer centric. It has to have a community focused view. And local governments are very well positioned. I mean, for years and years, they have been at the hub of receiving all kinds of data. I mean, they are so rich in data. It's, I think, at proper time now to take a leapfrog into what next it means for public services. And I think they've been doing a great job, especially in the last 2 years with COVID. So much has been accelerated. I think fantastic in pockets. We've seen great digitization. But as a whole, how do you bring the ecosystem together to genuinely deliver benefits? It can't be because I have a budget of so-and-so, let me just quickly do a point solution. No, it has to be a bit more deeper than that. So that's the first aspect, is what is the problem you're trying to solve? The second is, do you have the right kind of foundations in place to solve those problems? While sometimes it is very important to solve problems in silos, a lot of problems in silos, and you try solving a lot of them in silos, you get a siloed environment. So technically, you are not quite there to really get a view of what's happening. So I think those are the two foundations which I believe personally are very important to fix. I think work has started happening. It's more about engagement around the ecosystem of providers. Like David, you were saying that you're quite passionate about smart places, smart ways of working. Now, for local governments to harness some of that, obviously, I think they need to make sure that they have the right kind of partnerships as well within those areas of engagement. So that's my initial thought. I think in terms of IoT and data, I think one of the things I did want to say was, when you're talking about places, is quite interconnected. I mean, you can't really talk about IoT without data. In fact, data aggregation is a primary source of IoT essentially. So whenever we talk about IoT, it's data anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. And David, the big picture stuff, we talked before we recorded about the parameters, some of obviously the context around ethics, around privacy, around security. We're ready to move on in a sense, but you also have to acknowledge it as part of the conversation as well. So what's your sort of take on the big picture around the data and IoT ecosystem before we drill into those specifics?
Yeah, so you pick up a really good point, which is, we in public sector have spent the best part of 20 years debating whether we can or whether we can't. I think what we saw through COVID was busted wide open. And the answer is, of course we can.
Yeah,
but the caveat to it is, but we must do it transparently, and we must be clear about why we're doing it. And what was quite interesting about that was it was just right back to basics here. The law has always been very clear, and I remember speaking 15 years ago about don't blame GDPR for blocking stuff. It doesn't. It's your lack of clarity about why you want to do it. So Meeta's earlier point about what's the problems you want to fix gives you the mandate to then access that information. Now, the thing I love to refer to around the IoT piece and data piece is let's strip it right back to the basics when we're talking about these two things. What do we mean? IoT generates data, then we need to do something useful with that data. And that's the reality of what IoT really is here.
Yeah.
So what it does do, which we've never been able to do in the past, is it enables us to generate whole new rafts of new data in new ways in a place-based way, because IoT is place by nature. Yeah. So going back into the big picture piece, the conversations today need to be going forward on the basis of, right, let's be clear about the problems we need to solve. Let's be clear about the ways in which we can generate the right information to help us get there. Let's get access to that information and actually be clear and open and honest, the ethical question with the population.
Yeah.
Whether that be businesses, whether that's citizens, taxpayers, call them what you will, the population, right? About why we're doing this and what it is we want to achieve. I just came off a thing earlier today, actually, where there was some work on planning, where they've been doing a load of work on how they can make planning more accessible. And of course, this is planning in placemaking terms. So this is big planning. And a lot of the conversation there, fascinating, was around how we can use technology to reach people that don't connect planning with economy, with their house, with their school, with their children's school. And that's how you need to bring these. So the big picture stuff is how we start recasting public service and having conversations around what matters to people rather than what matters to institutions. Institutions are machines to do a thing. They're not an end in themselves. And do you know what? My career in central government, they're dead easy to change.
As we have seen.
Exactly. Whereas places have always been there.
Yeah. Great. So great to sort of set that conceptual framework about how we need to sort of start to rethink some of this stuff, and nice opportunity now to get into some of these specifics, because I think there are some transformative opportunities out there, both in terms of how, but also in terms of the outcomes and what they look like. So I'm going to throw a few kind of big ticket labels at you, and I'd really be interested in both of you sort of picking them apart and sort of pulling out some of those key opportunities within those to understand how that might happen, what those benefits might be, what those outcomes might look like. So there's an idea around obviously better places to live. We've talked about this being place-based already, David. IoT and data, of course, has its roots in a place and a community. So these better places to live, off the top of my head, there's transport, homes, community hubs, all that good stuff. Who wants to have the first bite of this one of how data and IoT can start to deliver that transformative outcome? Meeta, you have the first crack at this one.
Why not? I mean, I'll just start with a view I have around this and a couple of use cases, in fact, we've been discussing and what we've seen in the market as well, right? So one of the things is, if you take a 30,000 level view on any country, and we talked about 15-minute city, etc. Now you have a view about your community that you live in. Yeah, I live in Reading. It's a nice little borough. It's still not as digitized as I would like it to be, but it's a nice little borough. If I live in the town, how easy is it for me to get access to everything that I want? How can I quickly go and get a bus? If my parents visit, for example, can they have accessible parking? And those kind of things. Now for a borough or a council to make those decisions, one of the things, it's a big ticket item, is creating a digital twin of the community. How does that connect? So you get a view around in that space. You have access to your road parking, your transport, your building sites, your emergency services. You get a view of all of those things. The more data you collect in that community, those kind of things, you can use that analytics to better predict citizen behavior, but also predict, and give view to how you can better use, for example, all the services that you may have. So that's a big ticket item. And I've been thinking about it. I know some councils have already done it, especially I saw the city of Bradford do it very recently, but they did it in conjunction with a few other providers globally as well. But how do we make it a little bit more accessible for the rest of the councils in UK? I mean, it should not be a proof of concept. It should be the way it is if you want to reach that smart spaces and better places concept. So that's my initial thought, David. But obviously there are some use cases as well.
Yeah, and I think there are three things that have always stood out for me in local government, and central plays into it, which are and it's back to those big questions you first. What are you trying to solve here? And the start point is always: is it economy? Is it environment? Yeah. Is it protection of the vulnerable? Yeah. Are these the things that are interesting, or the drivers for your geographies? Starting from that point then gets you into, okay, and how can I use the tools of the trade to help me deal with that? Then you get into root cause analysis. You understand how you got to that place in the first place. Then look at what digital can do for you. Then you're starting a conversation with Microland or other organizations about, actually, I get what I'm trying to deal with here. I want you to work with me to actually put together the things that can make that difference to those 3,000 people in Jaywick or those 15,000 people in a really deprived area of Rotherham that's had a very traumatic experience. That kind of thing. That's the kind of conversation we need to be having around this stuff. I love the reason I love the 15-minute city so much as a concept is because it busts wide open the 40, 50-year-old thinking that's been in public sector of CBD, entertainment, residential, and let's put a park in just because we need a bit of green, and that's Lego City. That's not how people live, and it's not how ecosystems develop. And what you end up with is, quite often we have ended up with, is a pretty awful situation we have in the UK here at the moment with dormitory towns and CBD, so London, Chelmsford, that kind of thing, where you end up with deserts outside the urban centre and hot houses, quite literally, past couple of, But basically, we ship populations in and out on mass transit, and that's not quality of life.
Mm.
No. And we're seeing, isn't it interesting, how the reaction has been through the COVID piece and what's come out the other end of it, when people are going, oh, it's time to come back to the city. No, no, it isn't.
No one wants to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's getting maturity getting better, which is yes, but for purpose. And that for me gets me onto my next big question, Reef, which is being more purposeful about what we're going to do with our places and how that works with the populations in the broader sense that you're going to work with an ecosystem. And the last bit I want to kind of just finish on that is the bit of connectedness. And we don't spend enough time thinking about connectedness. The kind of commuter town thing is an interesting one, which is understanding, and you actually touched on it, Meeta, quite a good point on the buses. We can get somebody from the centre of Reading into London in 30 minutes, but we can't get somebody from the centre of Reading to one of the housing estates in the same time.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yep.
Who planned that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, Tim,
just the accessibility, absolutely. And in fact, I think you did touch upon the economic growth as well, and how do you really invent high streets? It's so important, right? Because and honestly, I didn't give it much thought before the whole COVID pandemic, because you live your life, you get things, you don't think about it so much. Everything happens. Economy is booming. It's only when the economy is not booming do you really figure out, oh yes, okay, you could probably rethink some of these things. High streets are in a slightly different shape as to what they were 3 years ago. And that's not going to change, but how do you repurpose those high streets? So how do you really engage with community? One of the things is getting data. And this comes back to how can we get access, not as solution providers, but how as councils, government can get access to all the data that is generated from, let's say, payment channels, who is paying where? I mean, most of the people we keep hearing they're paying on digital forums. Yes, that's true. But that does not mean that people do not want face-to-face interactions. It could mean maybe some purchases, but a lot of events, for example, a lot of market communities. How do you get, and I keep giving the example of Reading. I've lived in Reading town centre pretty much all my life that I've been in the UK. But one of the things that is missing is engagement with the community. That is, how do you make sure that you know what the community needs, and then you get the kind of tools to build that for the community? So I think the footfalls that you're getting from various town centers, high streets, matching them up to various payment channels, figuring out what kind of things are important for the community, and then designing your services around it. I think that's one of the key things. But that does come back to the culture. Yeah.
And I'm going to build, because that's a really good point. That's something I've come across actually locally here in Braintree recently, which is cool. So one of the really powerful things IoT can help us really tackle is demand responsive transport, actually being much more flexible in the way we develop our transport and our connectedness within towns and between towns. So we still suffer quite often from an old-fashioned kind of, we have bus routes and we do this thing and these are the routes, and we put them out to bus companies and they do what they do, and we have rail and so on and so on. But how often do we actually challenge whether they are in the right place, whether the places they're going to and from are still the right places, whether we've put things in the right place, or whether it's time to move? And just playing that through, a couple of really good examples. So here in Braintree, we have a thing called a shopping village on the outskirts of the town, and you can get a bus from the town centre to there and back, right? But if you want to get to anywhere else, you have to go on a 15 to 20 minute walk over a bridge, over a dual carriageway to get to another bus stop to get to the outlying villages, or you have to get a bus back into the town to get another bus back out again. So who thought of that?
Yeah.
And I suspect it's not been revisited since it was first created.
No.
Similarly, a lot of public infrastructure, and this is a big thing for local government, a lot of our public infrastructure has grown up over 140, 150 years, give or take, most of it. Yeah. And the vast majority, it was built in the mid 30s and in the late 40s, 1940s and 1930s. So, question, are our primary schools in the right place today? relative to the populations of those children are serving. Are our secondary schools in the right place? Are our hospitals in the right place? Are our town halls? I did some work with Hammersmith years ago, where we were looking at putting in one-stop shop. This is before we got really good digital stuff, and the default position. Oh yeah, we'll put the one-stop shop in the town centre. And we said, well, hang on a minute. We challenged it. We said, so why are we putting it in the town centre? Oh, because everyone goes there. I said, why do they go there? Oh, because we've put the one-stop shop in the town centre and they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Why don't you put one in each of the big housing estates and stop forcing them to spend money getting on a bus, go and do business with the council? Do you know what I mean? It's
oh, that's an interesting view, yeah.
So it's thinking differently. And back to your point on town centres, I think there's a fundamental point today, I think, in local government. It's going to test which ones are going to be the leaders and the laggards in local government over the next 3 or 4 years. Those that can see and get the ambition to transform what is now basically a dinosaur fact. Yeah. Right. And those that can transform it in a way that can bring life back into much needed space. We all hear that there's a desperate need for housing, there's a desperate need for space, and a desperate need to connect communities. Those that are ambitious, that create that in town centres, are the ones that are going to fly. The laggards are going to be those that are going to keep trying, flogging a dead horse, trying to get retail that doesn't exist anymore back in.
No.
Yeah. Or worse still, converting it to office space when no one wants to go to the office anymore.
No, absolutely. I think it's the innovation there that will definitely drive some of these cities, or towns as well.
So what's needed for that, for those that are going to be the leaders? I guess 2 points. How are things like data and IoT enabling that? What do they need to be doing now in order to prove use cases, in order to make the right choices, make the right decisions, reimagine designs of town centres in the right way? And then how can they be brave enough to do it and be the leader as opposed to the follower? That's, I guess, probably fill 3 hours on that one itself. But what are your thoughts on how to make a success of it?
Well, I mean, I can just give a bit of a view, I guess. I'm sure, David, you'll have much deeper insights. But I think, and it comes down to a culture of a council, is what I genuinely believe is, if you need to change anything, you need to change how you operate within yourselves. So you need to have a very, very strong design and data-centric view of the organization. You need to have a very clear top-down approach. I think there is a view on the top of the councils, the exec level, that yes, we should change. How does that drill down to the, to a development team, to a caseworker? A caseworker needs to visualize what a change in this particular behavior, what would it mean for that person? It would mean much more easier access to care home providers, for example, much more easier access and not so much travel going to each of the social care responsibilities that they may have. So I think the visualization of what it would mean to be a truly public-centric and data-centric organization needs to be really structured and flown down, is my view to start out with. And that's not easy. It's easier said than done, but yeah.
No, I agree, and I think there is a point now, and we've been at this point, I think, for a little while, but there is a point now where local government needs to get brave.
Yeah,
local government owns the local place. Fact, that's they're locally accountable. The democratic mandate is there. The sense of detail around place resides in that space. But local government can't do it all. Local government needs to convene, needs to collaborate, needs to be the place where you bring together those data sets. It's for local government to broker the deals with the DWPs and the HMRCs and the Department for International Trade and all those other entities to make it happen, and with the other sectors, and crucially with the private sector.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the data, and we've had this and data shows and stuff, haven't we, Tim, where a lot of Whitehall departments have said actually there's hugely valuable data in the private sector that if you have the right conversation in the right way, and you'll know this from your background, I guess, Meeta, in the commercial sector, is recognition of commercial advantage, recognition of value need to play through. But there is still a brokerage to be had to gain access to that information. And back in answer to your question, Tim, we need deep insight. I'm a big fan of personas. I'm a big fan of digital twins for exactly that reason. Now,
Yeah.
this isn't the kind of stuff we've seen coming out from some other quarters around doing kind of agile and a transactional piece of this and a bit of that. It needs to be bigger. It needs to be bigger, more rounded, and more ambitious in tackling the core issue. Yeah, fixing a bus route does not generate economic gain, right? Fixing the transport infrastructure to get everybody in conjunction with a coherent apprenticeship program with the local college in conjunction with the industrial units on the outskirts that can create those apprenticeship opportunities. That's the level we need to be at.
Absolutely. So the message is, I mean, we sort of broken these topics down to facilitate a conversation, but the key point is you can't pull one of these levers without understanding which other levers you're pulling at the same time. Otherwise, you just fix one bit, you shunt the problem elsewhere, either literally or sort of metaphorically. So another one that's, I mean, we were talking before, we've just come out the back of, 39 degrees for a couple of days. The world is changing environmentally. And then I guess there's a big E and small e question around this, around that kind of environmental piece. What's changing? How are we monitoring? How are we acting upon the data that we're collecting as our places change physically, environmentally, in terms of climate, whatever it might be. So how's the data and IoT piece going to play out in terms of that environment around us? Maybe Meeta, you have the first stab at that one and helping to understand. Yes, we've got data. Yes, there are numbers. Some of them seem pretty scary, but what's next? What do we do with that? How do we act on it?
Yeah.
Well, I think there are much better professionals out there who look at climate change on a daily basis from a research point of view. I think what would be good is to make that data available to rest of the population as well, for the innovators to truly come out. And the example I can think of, very, very basic example, not as big as climate change, but equally important a few years ago was how do you get from one place to the other? And when data was opened up, City Mapper was created by an entrepreneur. I mean, that's just a like I said, very small example, but there are climate researchers who may not have access to the right kind of data, and a local government or even central government can really bring together all the data that is there within utilities sector, within all the measures that we have from an air control, temperature control point of view, for us to create models that can then be pushed out for, hey, these are the kind of houses you need to build, which would be a bit more cooler in hot weather. And that's from a housing point of view. These are the kind of environments you need to create to make sure that in 39 degrees heat or 40 degrees heat, you don't have to shut down everything. You can still cope with that kind of temperature. But like I said, I'm sure there's a lot of research being gone into it. I don't think those researchers have access to open data that can then be utilized to create something for the rest of the population. I mean, that's my view on this.
Yeah, and I think there's a global perspective around this, which is all right. So for the first time in history, the UK's hit 40 degrees. There's an awful lot of countries around the planet that do it every year. So what do they do differently to cope with it? What do we need to learn from them? So that brings in that kind of data, the analytics history piece. Coming back to your IoT point, I think there's a strategic and a tactical piece around this, Tim, which is interesting. So what I'm already seeing is the use of IoT to give us better local, closer insights on what's going on a day-to-day basis, the tactical climate challenge, which is the temperature's always gone up, right? And there's people that still deny it out there, but my big thing, I don't know if you saw it, was on the news, was the two NASA pictures of, what was it, 1979 and now, no, 76 and now going, yeah, the world's got a lot hotter. Here's two maps that show you. That's right. It depends,
it's just the way it is. Yeah.
The planet, that's the way it is,
Yeah.
It's there in visual form. Yeah. But what I am seeing, so the recognition that it's happening is right. Okay, so now how do we start? And your point there actually means, well, how do we start dealing with it? Let's start using and learning lessons and applying it. So in the IoT world, fantastic stuff around using IoT to give us detailed information around pollution monitoring, so that we then take proactive steps. And this is already happening, isn't it? Where you've got local authorities out there who've used IoT to identify properly where there are pollution hotspots, to then inform what they do around pedestrianisation and around traffic reduction. Great. That's IoT in action. That is real, and that's happening all over the country on a small scale. On a larger scale, there's some fantastic stuff being done on both coastal defence and coastal defence on flooding, and also on localised flooding, again, using IoT sensors up in some of the national parks in the peat bogs to know the level of moisture. So they know both the risk of fire as a consequence on drying out, but equally in wet periods, the risk of flood because there's more water than the peat bog can cope with. I love those. They are real life, here and now, practical IoT solutions making a difference to people's lives. You do that right, you stop 5,000 homes getting flooded. Tick. Yeah. You do the pollution thing, you reduce health conditions, in that community. Tick. That's kind of your practical stuff.
Yeah.
Back on the bigger strategic climate change piece, however, what do we do around that now? Quietly, they've been rolling out smart meters, haven't they, all over the country. Nobody ever talks about it, and I think it's such a shame, because I think it's probably one of the most revolutionary technology projects that's gone on in this country, in the last 20-30 years. Every house, every property in the country at some point will have a smart meter that tells us and educates an entire country about what energy consumption really means. That's changing behavior. And we do it. If you have one, don't you? If you've got a smart meter, you notice.
Yeah, you do.
And
I think that kind of goes to, absolutely. And just as an example as well, is just the smart home automation as well. I think we've just become so aware of all the data that, at least from a home and individual point of view, that's given to us. It's interesting. Kids these days just know how to test themselves on COVID and what kind of vaccinations are there. And it's giving us a whole generation of people who are much more aware of what data can do for you.
Yeah. And actually, Meeta, on your point around the level of connectivity and monitoring in homes, I think that leads to a really interesting and already very active area of IoT opportunity, which is around assisted living.
Yes.
David, we've heard a lot of case studies from our local government folks around, sensors in homes for assisted vulnerable people, making sure people are up and about when they're supposed to be, all that kind of stuff. So let's expand that out a bit. The protecting the vulnerable people, protecting those parts of our communities where historically there's been a blind spot or we haven't been able to assess the degree of challenge. So what can we do with IoT around this place in particular? David, I know this is a passion of yours, so maybe you want to take the first bite at this one.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw some numbers out, especially they're especially important for right now. So let's get some hard numbers out there on money, right? People staying in hospital cost £900,000 a day. Okay, people in care homes cost £600 or £700 a day, upwards to £900 a day. Yeah, good IoT technology to enable somebody to basically live a little bit more securely and safely in their home costs about £150 a month. The more we can help people stay more confidently in their home with a little bit of assisted technology, can have a seismic positive impact on those big taxpayer costs in those other two areas. But also from a practical point of view, what do we hear about as soon as we end up with, like, the change in the weather? The NHS reaching breaking point. Why? Because everyone's stuck in hospital. Why are they stuck in hospital? So, this piece around assisted living and supported living, you're right, it's a passion of mine, but it's an abiding frustration because the tech has been around for ages.
Yeah.
The business model makes perfect sense. Yeah, just look at those numbers. It doesn't take a mathematician to do the numbers on that to see where it makes sense. Whilst at the same time, we have these ongoing debates and arguments about who's paying for what. And back to your point, Meeta, budgets. Okay, it's NHS money versus local government money versus someone else's.
Yeah.
Do you know what? It's taxpayers' money still. So there is a piece to be had. So digital, the solutions exist. What's missing is the joined upness of that.
Yeah.
And the positioning of the business models to transcend institutional boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's a segue, I think, into an area, overlapping organizations, overlapping budgets, whose money is whose, but what's it there for, leads us to this point around how do the organizations themselves need to change, but also change the way they interact with other agencies as well? Do they need to change their services? Do they need to change their models? Meeta, what's your take on that? How public sector organizations maybe need to rethink, redesign so that they can take advantage of IoT opportunities and data-driven insights and all that sort of stuff. You're obviously working with these organizations on implementation, but what do you see around that piece that maybe crops up repeatedly that they need to kind of get ahead of now in order to make the best of this opportunity?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a slightly more, because I'm from a technology services organization, I'll give you a more technology side of a view. Not so much the policy side and how it should work between agencies. And maybe it will be, it'll move into that. But essentially, so for the last few months, we've been talking to multiple councils, and quite a few of them have had a view around, I want to improve. My vision is to improve customer experience and customer engagement. What does that mean? That means that, I want people to be more digitally aware. I want to make sure that digital exclusion gets reduced a bit, as well as I want my community to thrive from an economic point of view. Now, purely from a technical side of things, there's a big vision, but as a solution, they're like, oh, right, what we need is possibly a CRM. And they get a CRM, they implement a CRM, it doesn't solve the problems because I don't think they've really thought through all the way down to the infrastructure piece, because unless you fix that foundational infrastructure piece with modern infrastructure, it's not going to go all the way up to the unified customer view that they want. And I was talking to them and I was like, right, fine, you want this customer experience, you've implemented CRM, but let's start. What next after that? Do you have a view of all your lines of businesses? Yeah, probably not. Do you have a view of the data where it resides? Oh yeah, housing data resides here and council tax resides here. Some of it is not digitized. I'm like, right, okay, so who's thought about the data architecture piece, right, at the fundamental level? He's like, no, we don't really have a data architect. I'm like, yes, but if you have to do this, you really need to have designers, whether it's service designers, data designers. You need to have enterprise architects and data architects. And this is what I've seen in, I've worked in private sector organizations. When you ever start on a digital transformation piece, you do start with some of these pieces, and they've learned it the hard way as well, right? No one comes into this piece with everything ready. But those are the kind of discussions that we've been having where you have this amazing aim that you want to achieve, but you don't really want to look at some of the genuine fixes you need to make. Look at modern infrastructure and look at applications which are a little bit better. Have you modernized your applications in recent times? Have you brought together a view of all the data sources? Have you really looked at what kind of data do you want to gather from the customers? And one of the key things we've been talking about is have some measurable KPIs that you can really view. I mean, if you can't see it, you really don't know what's happening. So have some visualized KPIs, you want to include everyone, you want to make it more digitally inclusive. Track it by using a view around how many people are engaging with you digitally versus how many are not. Where are you engaging with people? How many caseworkers do you have? How are they going and meeting them? And this kind of also ties into the IoT piece and adult social care, because the moment you have some of these basics fixed, you can have that IoT data coming into your customer database and giving you a view as well for you to make better decisions. So that's a technology view, and these are some of the things that we've been discussing. It's a problem which is there everywhere. I think, and there's a great opportunity for local governments to really look at it, take some time and really look at that problem. Obviously, budgets is something they need to think about, but still, yeah.
Yeah, but building on that technical point, it's a really good point on the technology piece, because we've not mentioned cloud yet and stuff like that, which is what I think is really coming home to roost now is a large part of that 360-degree view, unified view of the customer and all the rest of it is about how deep you can reach into the different systems that make up that view. So in a local authority, you will have a fragmented view of a person depending on the different interactions you have with somebody. And what you actually want is to be able to pull that together in the way that banking's had to do for their customers, frankly, because me as a resident, I want to see myself in the context of my public services, which involve two councils because I'm in a two-tier area, but I also have a business. to run, and I want to be able to see my business as a persona and how that's interacting at a national level and a local level. So there's that. Back to the cloud question. If you're still running with legacy on-prem systems that can't access, where people can't access the data, then you're going to have to do something about it, because it's just not acceptable anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So that's challenge one, back out to public sector. And I think we're now beyond the debate. I think the debate's over with about the journey on this. We're now into how are you going to get there? And your point, Meeta, about cost and stuff, there are business cases that make this stuff pay. There are return on investments through transformation that can make this stuff pay. And they can be a bit uncomfortable. But the reality is it's what the customer, the resident, is expecting. And our responsibility is to get to that destination and deal with that discomfort, not to say it's too difficult.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing is that, as much as everyone wants to get excited and start spraying IoT sensors all across their borough or city or district or county, you got to do. Yeah, you got to do some hard yards first internally. Get your systems right, get your processes right, get your culture right, get your organizational structure right roles, right skills. Otherwise, you're just buying toys, and ultimately you're not going to deliver that true transformation, across a community, as opposed to just, a smart traffic light blinking on and off every now and again. So good to drill into some of those specifics, but also those kind of underlying factors and change processes that need to happen as well. Well, I'm conscious we've done a good sort of 45 minutes at least there. We've really drilled into some of those use cases, some of those underlying factors and trends, how the technology, how the culture, how the organizational change play into that as well. Maybe a vision for what these transformed places might look like in the future, which sound like places I'd like to live. So let's keep going with that. Let's keep going on that route. Glad I wasn't having to get on a train into London yesterday, for example, in 40-degree heat. So there is progress being made. All that remains for me to do is thank you both, Meeta and David, for your contributions, for your insights, and for your passion around this topic. Great conversation. So thank you to you both.
No, thank you. I think it's been an awesome experience connecting with both of you, and really look forward to continuing our collaboration with GovX. I think it's been exciting in the last few months to really look at all the things that you've been talking about with councils as well, with a genuine passion for improving public services. So no, thank you for that.
Yeah, great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
So there we have it. Thank you to Meeta and David for sharing their insights and passion around the IoT piece and how it's playing out in local government service design, smart places, connected communities, all of those huge factors that are changing lives, changing citizen outcomes for the better. Great to get into some of that practical stuff as well as those strategic issues. So thank you to them both for sharing again. We'll be back soon with another conversation with a public sector change maker, but until then, goodbye.